Hello, friends, and good morning. Welcome to another episode of BNN. This morning, we'll be doing Sutta study with Bhante Suddhaso. And we'll be looking at the Rāhula Sutta, the greater discourse of advice to Rāhula. So we have put a link to the sutta in the live chat so you can read along with us. And if you have any questions at any time, you can write them in the live chat and Bhante Suddhaso will address them at the end of the talk. So I'll pass things over to Bhante.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good morning, friends. So, as mentioned, this morning we'll be looking at the first half of the Rāhula Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 62, the greater discourse of advice to Rāhula. This morning we also have a cat with us. So this is Venerable Stan, son of monastery cat, who came to join for sutta study without an invitation. So we, as usual, we will read through the sutta and I'll periodically stop to give some explanations and we'll stop about halfway through for taking questions. So please feel free to type in questions at any time during the sequence and I'll answer them at the end. It's better to enter questions before I finish because then we make sure that we get your questions addressed. So the sutta begins. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi at Jeta's Grove in Anathapindika's park. Then the Blessed One dressed in the morning, took his bowl and robe, and entered Savatthi for alms. Venerable Rāhula, also dressed, took his bowl and robe, and followed closely behind the Blessed One. So for those who are not aware, Venerable Rāhula was the Buddha's son. So before the Buddha set out to become a monk, so before the Buddha was enlightened, he was married and he had one child, a son named Rāhula. And shortly after Rāhula was born, the Prince Siddhartha set out to begin his spiritual quest, to begin his search for enlightenment. Then after the Buddha attained enlightenment, he went back and taught the Dhamma to his son and to his former wife, both of whom became Buddhist monks and both of whom eventually attained enlightenment. So there's a few discourses which involve Venerable Rāhula and the instructions given to Venerable Rāhula in order to help him attain enlightenment. Keep in mind, by the way, that Venerable Rāhula was 7 years old when he became a monk. So that's quite young to get started. But I guess if you have good enough karma to be the son of a future Buddha, then your affinity with the Dhamma is extremely strong. So getting started at 7 wasn't much of a challenge for him. Again, Venerable Rāhula, in this case, he's following behind the Buddha as they set out for alms round. The sutta continues. Then the Blessed One looked back at Venerable Rāhula and said to him, Rāhula, any body whatsoever, past, future, or present, internal or external, obvious or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near. All bodies are to be accurately seen with right wisdom in this way. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. And Rāhula asks, just the body, Blessed One? Just the body, Sublime One? And the Buddha replies, the body, Rāhula, and also feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. So what this is introducing with is a very common teaching that we see in the suttas on developing the perception of not self in relation to the 5 components of being, the 5 aspects of personal existence. So the list of 5 that's given here, so body, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. This is called the 5 khandhas, the 5 components of being, which is one way of summarizing body and mind, one way of summarizing what we think of as me. So we think, I am the body, I am these feelings, I am this perception, I am these mental formations, I am this consciousness. So here the Buddha is giving the instruction to Rāhula. He's saying, well, view any body whatsoever as not me, not mine, not myself. So not just your own body, so that would be internal, but also other bodies, external. Not just your current body, the present body, but also whatever body there was in the past and whatever body there might be in the future. Also he talks about obvious and subtle. So many spiritual traditions talk about a subtle body, that we have this obvious, coarse, unrefined body, this meaty, chunky thing right here, but that immediately overlaying it or within it, there's a subtle energy body. So a very refined body. Well, that also is not me, not mine, not who I am. So some spiritual practitioners will say, well, I'm not this meaty flesh and blood body, but I am the subtle energy body that occupies the same space. Well, the Buddha says that's also not you. So the Buddha didn't reject the idea of a subtle energy body, but he said subtle energy body is also not who you are, also not yours, also not your true self. Inferior or superior, far or near. So he's just being completely clear here. He's like, there's no exceptions. All bodies, all physical substance of any sort, anywhere, anytime, any variety, all of it is to be seen in exactly the same way as this is not mine, I am not this, this is not myself. So this is the teaching on anatta, on not self, which is a teaching when, if practiced completely, leads all the way to full enlightenment. So Venerable Rāhula, it says, then Venerable Rāhula, thinking, how could one who has been personally advised by the Blessed One enter a village for alms? Turned back, sat at the base of a tree, crossed his legs, set his body upright, and established mindfulness. In other words, Venerable Rāhula, he's like, what am I doing wasting my time going out to get food when I've just been given direct instructions by the Buddha to practice the perception of not self? It's like, maybe it would be better for me to spend my time by trying to pierce through the meaning of the Buddha's words, trying to develop the skill the Buddha told me to develop. So the Buddha didn't say, Rāhula, enter the village for alms. The Buddha said, Rāhula, perceive body and mind as not me, not mine, not myself. Of course, you can do that while going in the village for food, but it's much more difficult. It's much less challenging to do it during meditation practice. And it's still really challenging during meditation practice, just to be clear. So Venerable Rāhula goes back to the monastery and sits down under a tree to do some meditation. And the sutta continues. Venerable Sariputta saw Venerable Rāhula seated at the base of a tree, legs crossed, body upright, and mindfulness established. So Venerable Sariputta was one of the Buddha's 2 main disciples. So the Buddha had 2 main disciples who he said were almost his equal in teaching Dhamma. Not quite, because they weren't Samma Sambuddhas, but they were almost his equal. So there's many suttas which are given by Venerable Sariputta. who's known in particular for his analytical precision in approaching the Dhamma, in dividing things into their component pieces and explaining each component piece in detail. So Venerable Sariputta then very often would give instructions to the monks when the Buddha was not around. So here Venerable Sariputta, it says, having seen this, he said to Venerable Rāhula, Rāhula, practice mindfulness of breathing. Rāhula, when mindfulness of breathing is practiced and cultivated, it is of great fruit and great benefit. So I'm starting to feel a little bit for Venerable Rāhula at this point in the sutta, because first he's like, I'm going to go for alms with the Buddha. I'm going to get food with the Buddha. And then the Buddha's like, no, practice the perception of not self, focused on the 5 components of being. And Rahula's like, okay. And he goes and he sits down and he's like, I'm going to practice not self on the 5 khandhas. And Sariputta comes up and Sariputta's like, no, you're going to practice mindfulness of breathing. And Rahula's like, okay, I guess I'm going to practice mindfulness of breathing. So there's kind of this feeling like Rahula's plans keep getting changed. So the sutta continues. Then in the evening, Venerable Rāhula emerged from retreat, approached the Blessed One, paid respects to him, and sat to one side. When he was seated to one side, he said to the Blessed One, Bhante, how is mindfulness of breathing to be practiced and cultivated so that it is of great fruit and great benefit? And the Buddha replies, Rāhula, whatever internal personal component that is experienced as hard or solid, such as head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin, muscles, tendons, bone marrow, kidney, heart, liver, membrane, spleen, lungs, colon, intestine, stomach, feces, or any other internal personal component that is experienced as hard or solid. Rāhula, this is called the internal earth element. And at this point, you're probably thinking, what on earth does that have to do with mindfulness of breathing? And the answer is nothing. So I read this as the Buddha's giving Venerable Rāhula a subtle admonishment. So remember, the Buddha told Rāhula to practice the perception of not self using the 5 khandhas. And then Rāhula instead spent the day practicing mindfulness of breathing and then came to the Buddha to ask for instructions on mindfulness of breathing. So the Buddha completely disregards Rāhula's question and instead comes back once again to a way of practicing not self, which in this case is using the elements as a starting point. So the elements are the basis of the physical body. So this actually loops back to the Buddha's original instruction. His original instruction to Rāhula was to see the body as not me, not mine, not myself. And so since Rāhula apparently didn't get the message, the Buddha's coming back to that same point. He's just breaking it down into more fine detail. So going through the physical elements of the body, and once again, giving instructions on not self. So he continues. He says, Rāhula, this is called the internal earth element. Whether earth element is internal or external, it is the same earth element. In other words, the physical stuff that makes up your body is exactly the same as the physical stuff that makes up everything outside your body. Your body is made up of the same hard, solid matter as the floor, the walls, the trees, the stones, the dirt. It's all exactly the same earth element. It's all exactly the same hard, solid matter. And in fact, what's your body made up of? Elsewhere in the suttas, in a number of places, the Buddha actually directly states, this body is built up out of rice and grain. So where does rice and grain come from? Where does food come from? It comes from the dirt. So dirt turns into food. Food turns into the body. And then the body turns back into dirt. So it's just the same earth element, just changing shape, changing location, changing structure. But fundamentally, it's just the same earth element. So we see it very clearly. When we look at dirt, we know that's not me, that's not mine, that's not myself. When we look at food, We know that's not me. We might start thinking it's mine, but we know that's not me, that's not mine, that's not myself. But then we put the food inside our body. And at some point, we start to think that food is me. It's now become part of me. It's now become part of my body. It's now become part of myself. And a few hours later, we go to the toilet and expel what's left of it. And suddenly it's not me, not mine, not myself anymore. And then it mixes back with the soil and becomes food, and the cycle keeps going and going. But actually, the Buddha is quite clear. It's always not me, not mine, not myself. It's just for a brief period of time, we have the delusion that it is me, mine, and myself. So the Buddha, he says, whether earth element is internal or external, it is the same earth element. It should be accurately seen with right wisdom in this way. This is not mine. I am not this. This is not myself. So again, looping back to the instruction he had given Rāhula that morning, the instruction which Rāhula had chosen not to follow, and instead to follow Sariputta's instructions. The Buddha says, when one has accurately seen it with right wisdom in this way, one becomes disenchanted with the earth element, and the mind becomes dispassionate towards the earth element. So this is the sequence that we commonly see. So disenchantment leads to dispassion. And disenchantment comes from seeing things with wisdom, seeing things as they are. So when we see reality as it is, then it breaks the enchantment. It breaks the spell. It breaks the infatuation that we have. We see things as they are. We see that this body is no different from the dirt. It's no different from the feces. It's no different from the food. It's no different from the trees, the stones, the hills. It's all exactly the same earth element. So we start to lose our infatuation with this body and to just see it for what it is, which is a function of the natural world, a part of the natural world, just part of the cycle of earth element shifting and changing position, but nothing to be excited about, nothing to be obsessed with. And so from disenchantment then comes dispassion. When we start to lose our obsession with things, then we also lose our craving and attachment towards them. I'd like to talk a little more about the word disenchantment, by the way. In Pali, this is nibbida, and the verb form is nibbindati. Commonly translated disenchantment, but you'll sometimes see it translated as revulsion, which I think completely misses it. What are some others? Bhante Sujato, I think, has an interesting translation, but I'm blanking on it right now. So nibbindati, it comes from the prefix ner, which means down or away from or not or without. And the verb vindati. So vindati means to search for, to look for, to seek out, to find. So nibbindati means that one stops searching for something. One stops looking for it. One stops seeking happiness in something. One stops seeking satisfaction in something. So one no longer engages in this search for trying to get what we want. One puts down this endless quest for getting just the right body, just the right mind. So disenchantment fades away. So with disenchantment, our quest fades away. The seeking fades away. Did you find the
Disillusionment.
Disillusionment? That's great. Yeah. Yeah. Disillusionment, disenchantment. Yeah. Yeah. So when we stop seeking happiness in that which is impermanent and not self, then our lust, our craving, our attachment, our obsession with those things also dissipates. And elsewhere in the suttas, in many places, the Buddha says dispassion liberates. So when we let go of our passion and attachment to things, then the mind becomes free, unhindered, perfectly happy and content. So then the Buddha continues going through the elements. He says, Rāhula, what is the water element? The water element may be internal or external. Rāhula, what is the internal water element? Whatever internal personal component that is experienced as water or watery, such as bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, oil, saliva, mucus, synovial fluid, urine, or any other internal personal component that is experienced as liquid or wet. Rāhula, this is called the internal water element. Whether water element is internal or external, it is the same water element. It should be accurately seen with right wisdom in this way. This is not mine, I am not this, this is not myself. When one has accurately seen it with right wisdom in this way, one becomes disenchanted with the water element, and the mind becomes dispassionate towards the water element. So this is applying the same investigation towards the liquid component of our experience. So the earth element is focusing on the solid part of our experience, the hardness of the body, the solidity of the body. The water element is focusing on the liquid aspect of the body, its moisture, the dampness, the wetness of the body. So this is a more refined way of developing a perception of not self towards the body, is to see it in terms of these different aspects of experience, and seeing each aspect as being impersonal, an impersonal part of the natural world. So the body is made up of hard, solid, earth-like stuff, and it's also made up of wet, liquidy, watery stuff, which is exactly the same as all the wet, liquid, watery stuff in the world. You look at a pond. Well, your body has the same water inside it as the water in the pond. You look at a jar of oil in your kitchen. Well, your body has similar oily things inside it. It's not different. It seems different only because we think that this is me and that's not me. But actually, all of it is not me. It's all just an expression of the universe, of the natural world. Next, he says, Rāhula, what is the heat element? Sometimes translated as fire element, but the Pali word is tejo. So tejo more literally means heat. There's other words that are used for fire, such as agni, but tejo specifically means heat, not fire. It says, Rāhula, what is the heat element? The heat element may be internal or external. Rāhula, what is the internal heat element? Whatever internal personal component that is experienced as heat or heating, such as what brings warmth or causes decay or burns or causes what one has eaten, drunk, consumed, or swallowed to be completely digested, or any other internal personal component that is experienced as heat or heating, Rāhula, this is called the internal heat element. Whether heat element is internal or external, it is the same heat element. It should be accurately seen with right wisdom in this way. This is not mine, I am not this, this is not myself. When one has accurately seen it with right wisdom in this way, one becomes disenchanted with the heat element, and the mind becomes dispassionate towards the heat element. So this is everything that we experience as warmth. So both the body temperature, so the actual literal heat of the body, but also the feeling of burning in the body, the feeling of the body burning up, or the feeling of things wearing away and disintegrating within the body, or the feeling of digestion. So, for example, after you've had a meal, there's a feeling of heat in the stomach. Is that actual heat, or is that the digestive process that creates the illusion of heat? That doesn't really matter from the perspective of the meditation on the heat element. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it feels like heat. It feels like warmth. So the elements meditation is about what things feel like. It's about subjective experience. So it's not the same as science, the scientific field of chemistry, for example, or physics. It's not what this is talking about. It's not about trying to get to an objective reality. It's about reflecting on our subjective experience of the body. Our subjective experience of the body as being something that feels solid, but also feels wet and also feels warm, and the different ways that the body feels solid, wet, and warm. Next, he says, Rāhula, what is the wind element? So the Pali word is vayo, which sometimes you'll see this translated as air element, but again, that's not quite correct. Vayo literally means wind. It's from the verb which means to move. So you could also translate vayo dhatu as the motion element, the element of movement. But wind element is a bit closer to the apparent meaning. But keeping in mind that vayo, while it does mean wind, it also has that meaning of motion, of movement. And that can also help to clarify some of what the Buddha is talking about here. So he says, the wind element may be internal or external. Rāhula, what is the internal wind element? Whatever internal personal component that is experienced as wind or windy, such as upgoing winds, downgoing winds, winds in the belly, winds in the abdomen, winds moving along the limbs, inhalation, exhalation, or any other internal personal component that is experienced as wind or windy. Rāhula, this is called the internal wind element. Whether wind element is internal or external, it is the same wind element. It should be accurately seen with right wisdom in this way. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. When one has accurately seen it with right wisdom in this way, one becomes disenchanted with the wind element, and the mind becomes dispassionate towards the wind element. So this is the next major noticeable characteristic of the body, which is the experience of air moving through the body. So upgoing winds, so air moving up through the body, downgoing winds, air moving down through the body, winds in the belly. So if you've got gas in your stomach, you know what that feels like. Winds in the abdomen, we know what that feels like as well. Winds moving along the limbs. So there's some different opinions as to what that's talking about. Some people interpret that as being referring to, again, subtle energy currents flowing through the body. But I actually like to think of it as referring to when you breathe in, air flows into your lungs, and from your lungs, the air is absorbed into your blood vessels. The oxygen gets absorbed into your blood vessels, and then your blood vessels carries the oxygen all throughout your limbs, all throughout your whole body. So we think of blood as liquid, but blood is also carrying air throughout the body. So your whole body is quite literally circulating air all the time. So it circulates air all through the limbs and then circulates air back to the lungs where it gets expelled from the body again. If you take wind as meaning movement instead of just as wind, then that's also referring to the motion capability of the body, the ability of the body to move, just as wind moves. So that's another way that some teachers teach to contemplate the wind element, is through paying attention to the aspect of movement or motion. Notice here that finally the Buddha's kind of vaguely hinting at an answer to Rāhula's question. Remember, Rāhula asked about mindfulness of breathing. So finally, now that he's on the fourth element, he finally mentions inhaling and exhaling. But he doesn't go into any detail because, once again, he's just saying to see the wind element as not mine, not this, not me, not myself. So not paying particular attention to the breathing process in specific, but rather recognizing that all the windy components of the body are not self. And this is very clear because around you is air. And we're breathing in and out. And it's all just the same air. When does it become me? When does it become not me? When is it mine? When is it not mine? We draw these arbitrary distinctions of mine and not mine. But actually, it's always not mine. It's always not me. It's always just the wind element. It's always just an aspect of the natural world. So again, this is a meditation practice, which can be done. And it's a meditation practice which I use from time to time, which I give instructions in from time to time. So using the elements, and normally I use the list of 6 elements, using the elements as a basis for developing the perception of not self. Next, the Buddha says, Rāhula, what is the space element? The space element may be internal or external. Rāhula, what is the internal space element? Whatever internal personal component that is experienced as space or spacious, such as the ear cavity, the nose cavity, the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the rectum, or any other internal personal component that is experienced as space or spacious. Rāhula, this is called the internal space element. Whether a space element is internal or external, it is the same space element. It should be accurately seen with right wisdom in this way. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. When one has accurately seen it with right wisdom in this way, one becomes disenchanted with the space element, and the mind becomes dispassionate towards the space element. So here, unusually, the Buddha only gives the first 5 elements. So normally in the suttas, the Buddha either gives 4 elements, so earth, water, heat, and wind, or he gives 6 elements, adding space and consciousness. Here, he only gives the first 5. So rather than give 4 or 6, he gives 5. And this is a bit peculiar, it's a bit unusual. One way I understand this is, once again, the Buddha had started off from the beginning by saying, Rāhula, see the body as not me, not mine, not myself. So he's focusing on our physical experience. So physical experience is the first 4 elements which occur in space. So consciousness is outside the scope of the physical. So keeping with the theme that the Buddha started on, it wouldn't make sense for him to go into consciousness at this point. So the space element, here the Buddha is talking about becoming aware of the cavities, the open spaces in the body. And my understanding of this is it's using that as a starting point for becoming aware of the experience of space. So actually the whole body is occupying space. So it's bringing attention to the space that the body occupies, the space which we think of as mine. So becoming aware of what we believe to be our personal space, which of course ultimately there's no such thing as personal space. There is space, but it's not personal. It's just space. So then I'll go through the next 5 paragraphs, and then we'll take a pause and switch to some questions. So after describing the first 5 elements, then the Buddha gives some further instructions. So this is where he actually starts directly telling Rāhula how to meditate. He says, Rāhula, practice peacefulness of earth meditation. Rāhula, when you practice peacefulness of earth meditation, then sensations that arise, whether pleasing or displeasing, will not dominate your mind. Rāhula, just as when people put clean things, unclean things, excrement, urine, saliva, pus, or blood on the earth is not bothered, humiliated, or disgusted. In the same way, Rāhula, practice peacefulness of earth meditation. Rāhula, when you practice peacefulness of earth meditation, then sensations that arise, whether pleasing or displeasing, will not dominate your mind. So this is starting to introduce an attitude or approach to meditation. It's starting to introduce a way of positioning the mind. So contemplating the earth. So you have a stretch of dirt and you put something on it. The dirt is not bothered. It doesn't matter what it is. You can put a clean robe on the earth and the earth doesn't react. You can put a dirty robe on the earth doesn't react. You can even empty the cat's litter box onto the earth and the earth doesn't react. So in the same way, we recognize this body is also made up of the same earth element. So also, there's no need to react to whatever lands on this earth element, whether it's a pleasant sensation or an unpleasant sensation. It's just a sensation landing on the earth element. So just as the earth doesn't react when things are put on it, I also will not react when things are put on this earth element. So whatever sensation lands on this earth element, I will not react with either aversion or desire. So in other words, developing a mind that has the peacefulness of earth, the non-reactivity of earth, the steadiness and serenity of earth. Then he continues, Rāhula, practice peacefulness of water meditation. Rāhula, when you practice peacefulness of water meditation, then sensations that arise, whether pleasing or displeasing, will not dominate your mind. Rāhula, just as when people immerse clean things, unclean things, excrement, urine, saliva, pus, or blood in water, the water is not bothered, humiliated, or disgusted. In the same way, Rāhula, practice peacefulness of water meditation. Rāhula, when you practice peacefulness of water meditation, then sensations that arise, whether pleasing or displeasing, will not dominate your mind. And then he goes on in the same way. So next is peacefulness of heat meditation. So he says, just as when heat burns clean things, unclean things, etc., the heat is not bothered, humiliated, or disgusted. In the same way, practice peacefulness of heat meditation. Then wind, he says, just as when wind blows on clean things, unclean things, excrement, urine, saliva, pus, or blood, the wind is not bothered, humiliated, or disgusted. In the same way, practice peacefulness of wind meditation. And finally, he says, Rāhula, practice peacefulness of space meditation. Rāhula, when you practice peacefulness of space meditation, then sensations that arise, whether pleasing or displeasing, will not dominate your mind. Rāhula, just as space is not stuck anywhere. In the same way, Rāhula, practice peacefulness of space meditation. Rāhula, when you practice peacefulness of space meditation, then sensations that arise, whether pleasing or displeasing, will not dominate your mind. So this one I find particularly poignant. So just as space is not stuck anywhere, space is not obstructed by anything, and space does not obstruct anything. Nothing can stick to space, and space is not stuck anywhere. So things move freely through space without obstruction. And space is not the least bit bothered or affected by the things that move through it. So to develop one's mind in the same way, a mind like open space that lets things pass through it without influencing those things and without being influenced by those things. So I think that's a good stopping point for now. So we'll finish up the rest of the sutta tomorrow morning. But for now, if you have any questions or comments, this is your opportunity to go ahead and present them. Thank you.
So thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Welcome to Gita Jnana. Jens, Jessica, Sarah, Marielle, Aaron, Liz, Michael, Elaine, John, Inscrutable, and other friends who are watching but not typing in the live chat. So we have a couple questions and comments already. Elaine says, so good to see you, Bhante. John T. Inscrutable says, very glad to be here. Thank you all who work to make this possible. And Gita Jnana says, thank you, Bhante Suddhaso, for teaching this wonderful sutta this morning. Very nice to see you. So Michael has a question. He says, quality and feeling of stability, for example, sitting meditation, is the earth element. Instability, such as bodily restlessness during meditation, is wind element, can we say?
The experience of stability as being part of the earth element, I would agree with. But restlessness during meditation, I don't consider as being particularly related to the elements. I just see that as being restlessness during meditation. I see that as a hindrance. So a deep understanding of the elements is possible when body and mind are completely still. So this means that an understanding of the wind element also must be possible when the body and mind are completely still. So it can't be related to restlessness of body and mind. Could you see motion in the body as being related to the wind element? I guess so. But I wouldn't particularly recommend using that approach because you might find that that then encourages unsettledness during meditation. Instead, I recommend developing a more subtle awareness of the wind element flowing through the body. And actually, mindfulness of breathing is the most direct way of doing this, because you can feel the body inflating and deflating with each breath. You can feel the wind flowing and circulating through the body with each breath. And that can be very peaceful. It's actually, I don't normally do mindfulness of breathing, but contemplation of the wind element is actually the only way of doing mindfulness of breathing that particularly works for me. The only way that I actually like doing. And once again, it's best when the body and mind are completely still. So I don't recommend using restlessness as the basis for investigating the wind element. Okay.
And Michael also says, never heard of the space element. New to me. Usually I hear of earth, water, fire, wind.
Yeah, so the as I mentioned during the talk, the Buddha either talks about the four elements, which are the four listed, earth, water, heat, and wind, or he talks about the six elements, earth, water, heat, wind, space, and consciousness. And that's the list that I normally use, is the list of six, because it's complete. It's a complete representation of every aspect of our experience. I was actually never much interested in the four elements. And I think it's because the list of the four elements is not complete. But the six elements is complete. Similarly, the list of five elements is also not complete. It's okay, but it's not complete. The six elements is complete. So that's why I like to use it. If you practice the meditation on the six elements, then you know that nothing is being left out. It fully wraps up every part of your experience. Okay.
And Gita says, Bhante, is there any indication on how old Rāhula was when the instructions were given by the Buddha?
Do you know how old he was when he attained enlightenment?
He had become a bhikkhu by then.
Oh, so not for many years then. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how old he was at this time. We know that he became a monk when he was 7. And Bhante Pumuto says he thinks he was a bhikkhu when he attained enlightenment. But that might have been before the rule of being 20 was put in place.
Could be, but I do get the sense he was, like a teenager at this time, maybe 13, 14, 15. because there is, maybe that's a question I can pose to you, what you feel about the commentary's understanding that whether or not it's a made-up story, that Rāhula was obsessed with the Buddha's physical features. And that's why he alighted on form in the Buddha's instruction, because he was saying, hey, the Buddha looks good, I'm going to look good too.
Typical teenager.
I mean, I don't know, but as Bhante Sumino says, that is typical teenager stuff. So we don't know how old Rāhula was, but yeah, he was probably somewhere between 7 and 20 at the time.
According to the commentary, apparently he was 18, but it's the commentary.
Yeah,
so.
I don't place much faith in the commentaries.
All right. Gita also says this is a deep instruction, so Rāhula must have been ready for this teaching. Wonderful, Bhante. And Jens is also saying thank you. Sarah has a question. She asks, Bhante, please, may you elaborate on the difference between developing awareness and developing consciousness?
So I don't ever say develop consciousness. So in Buddhism, the word consciousness is more a technical term which refers to a component of our experience. So I wouldn't say develop consciousness, just as I would not say develop earth or develop water. So rather what I would say is contemplate consciousness. Develop the perception of not self in relation to consciousness. But I would never say develop consciousness, because it's not something to be developed, it's something to be understood. Whereas awareness is something that you can develop. You can develop awareness of the consciousness element, awareness of the functioning of consciousness. That's the distinction I would make. Awareness would probably be a translation of sampajanya, which normally goes hand in hand with sati. So sati sampajanya is mindfulness and awareness. Mindfulness and clear awareness.
Could you maybe briefly explain what consciousness is as a condo? Because I think sometimes there's, the popular understanding of consciousness versus the Buddhist sort of.
Yeah, consciousness is the experience of a sensory world. That's the way the Buddha normally uses it. He does, in a few places, use it in a more general sense. An example of this is in Paticca Samuppada, independent origination. He uses consciousness in a more general sense. But normally when the Buddha says vijnana, consciousness, he is referring to the experience of a sensory world. So, for example, eye consciousness is the experience of a visual world. Which is normally in terms of me and not me. So I am seeing that stuff. I am hearing that stuff. So that's visual consciousness and auditory consciousness. So it's not something to be developed. It's something which is to be understood. Something which is to be contemplated, to be known as it is. Okay?
Michael also says, I love the idea of the great sky without concern for bird droppings, cloud, even pollution. Does this indicate a connection between emptiness and the space element in a sense?
That's gone into in some detail in some of the Mahayana commentaries. The relationship between the space element and emptiness, or between the space element and nibbana. But I wouldn't go too far with this, because space is in fact space. It's a open nothingness in which objects can appear. But emptiness is not an open nothingness. Emptiness, you might say, is the union of nothingness and somethingness, the union of nothingness and everythingness. So that's quite a bit different from the space element. It would be more like if the space element also simultaneously had every single imaginable thing crammed into it all in one place at the same time, without overcoming the emptiness, the nothingness of space at the same time. So yeah, simply put, no. But space element is contained within emptiness. So emptiness is the merger of nothingness and everythingness. Let's go with that.
Okay. And then Gita says, I think he was in his early 20s when he fully ordained.
And as far as I recall, it actually doesn't specifically say anywhere in the suttas or in the Vinaya how old Rāhula was when he became a monk. So all we know is that he was 7 when he took novice ordination, but we don't know how old he was when he took bhikkhu ordination. We don't know how old he was when he attained enlightenment. We just know that he got novice ordination, again, when he was quite young and not long after the Buddha attained enlightenment.
Okay, so that's all we have for the questions so far this morning, unless somebody wants to type in at the last minute. Otherwise, we have a bunch of thank yous from Sarah, Robin, and Gita.
Okay. Well, maybe that's it for now then.
All right. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Tomorrow, Bhante Suddhaso will be exploring the second part of the sutta. And then we also have monk chat tomorrow evening. So if there are any questions that you were too shy to ask during the sutta study, you can bring them to monk chat, as well as any other somewhat related to Buddhism questions that you'd like to ask a panel of monks. Actually, Jason Heath has a comment at the very last minute. So one contemplates experienced things and cultivates things done. Maybe things that are already done. Or
I would say one cultivates things that are to be done. So one cultivates activities. But one also contemplates activities, I suppose. Okay.
All right. So thanks everyone for joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you later tonight for a talk from
one of us.
One of us on how to relax. And then tomorrow for the rest of this sutta, and then monk chat in the evening. All right. So enjoy the rest of the day. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.